Got a little bit quicker fly to tie today. This is a gold-ribbed hare's ear nymph. Very, very popular trout nymph. It is definitely a fly that if I was hitting any of the trout streams and thought that I was going to be doing any nymphing, I would definitely have a number of these in different sizes, possibly even different colors. It is tied primarily with fur from a hare's mask. The smaller sizes, say 16s, 18s, or even 20s, if you're going to tie that small, are going to be using hair from the actual ears. In the size 10, 12, and maybe 14, I prefer hair from around the actual mask. But it's a fairly quick tie. You can get a bunch of these done in no time. It has a lot of basic skills to it, and it's a wonderful fly to have in your fly box as well as to spend some time at the vise with. So let's go ahead and get started. To begin our gold-ribbed hare's ear, we're going to place the hook in the vise. This is a Mustad 3906B, which is a standard nymph hook. I'm using a brown uni thread 8/0. I'm going to attach my thread a little bit behind the eye right here. Other people have different ways in which they put this fly together. This just is what happens to work for me. I'm using for a rib on this, I'm using some Danville size 18 gold oval tinsel. Some people like to use a flat mylar tinsel. You could use a Danville size 16 or 18 flat mylar tinsel with the gold side. That would work just as well. I'm going to attach this on the underside of the hook, just behind the hook eye, and start wrapping down the hook shank. As I do that, I'm going to bring the tinsel over to the opposite side so that that tinsel gets wrapped down along the hook shank, just on the underside of the hook or a little bit over on the outside of the hook this way. And this is going to help when it comes to tying in or wrapping our rib in and not moving the tail. Now, for the tail of this, and actually for this fly, the majority of the fly, the abdomen and the thorax, is all made from hair from a hare's mask. And for the tail on this, we're going to use some of the guard hairs from I like to use from just inside of the top of the forehead of the hare's mask. I'm going to cut a section out of hair like this, and when I cut this out, you can see I have a whole bunch of guard hairs in here like this, and then underfur. What I'm going to do is separate just a section like this, and that will give me enough for my tail and a little extra. And I'm going to be careful to set all of this aside. And I'll explain in a minute, but we're going to be using the guard hairs and the underfur on this fly. I'm going to hold the guard hairs in my left hand, gently stroke out the underfur with my right hand, and so all I'm left with is just the guard hairs on this. As you can see now, I have a clump of guard hairs that'll make a little tail here for our fly. If it's a little too thick, you can go ahead and thin that out right before you tie those in. It's up to you. I prefer to have one that's just a little bit bushier. I'm going to tie these in so that the tips are sticking out from the end of the shank here, maybe about half a shank length. So I'll set those in. I'll secure those to the hook shank, a little pinch wrap, a couple wraps in there. I'm going to wrap up just a little bit just to bind those in. You don't have to. We're going to put some dubbing over all of that, so you could wait and just bind that down when you do the dubbing, but it just makes it a little bit easier to work. Now I'm going to advance my thread down the hook shank all the way down to the very end of the shank, and that is going to be just in front of the barb of the hook, or right at the barb right here. So that's our tail, just the guard hairs. The abdomen, we're going to be using just underfur. However, as you can see on this hare's mask, there's lots of different kinds of hair. There's lighter hair that has lots of underfur. There's a little bit darker guard hairs with just a little bit of underfur under there. And then the hare's ears themselves I use if I'm going to be tying these in a real small size. This is a size 12 hook. If I'm going to tie these in, say, a 16 or 18, then I'm going to be taking a lot of hair more from the ears here where it's shorter and bristlier. Anyway, on the back side of the mask, you can see where the cheeks come around. There's all kinds of light-colored hair, orangish color hair, light-colored hair that can be used. And I like to use this for the abdomen. So I'll cut out a section of the lighter fur that's on the side, like this right here. I'll get the guard hairs out of here because what I really want for this is just the light underfur. And then I'll mix all of this up, and that's just by pulling it in half and then overlapping it and then mixing it up like this. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just mix that up a little bit so you get more of a uniform color. But what this is going to do is it's going to make the abdomen a much lighter color, which is what I'm looking for. Keep in mind this is a small fly, so we're going to start with our abdomen very narrow back here, and then as we get up to about halfway or maybe 60% up the hook shank, it's going to get wider. But we don't want this to get too bushy and too thick, so the idea is to keep this fairly thin. Also keep in mind that because of the tail that we tied in here, we already have a little bit of bulk on the hook shank right here. So I'm going to take just a little bit of underfur and I'm going to twist that onto the hook here, or excuse me, onto the thread. And you'll notice that when I do this, right in this area here, it's very thin. It comes down, it's very, very thin, because that's what's going to start wrapping right in the back. So I want that to be very, very sparse. This is going to be a very, very short little dubbing noodle, maybe 1.5 inches to 2 inches. Generally, they're only about 1.5 inches. Also keeping in mind that if you were tying this on smaller hooks like a 14 or a 16, this is going to be even shorter. It does not take much dubbing to fill up small hooks. So once we have our dubbing noodle, I'm twisting this on the thread so that it is pretty tight and compact onto the thread. And this is just the way I do it. You'll see other instructions from other people, the way they do it. They like this all shaggy and bushy, and that's fine. I think it fishes just fine. This is just the way that I prefer to do it. I'm going to start wrapping my thread right down at the end of the body, and as soon as I engage the dubbing right along the hook shank back here, I'm going to start advancing that forward because I don't want to have a lot of bulk down here. I want this thin. I'm going to, let me start that over again. It's not quite as thin as I want it to be. And if it's not right, you can always just unwrap it, start wrapping it back in. Make certain it's the way you want it to be when you're tying these flies. So there I get just a small bit of dubbing right in the back, and I start to advance this forward, and notice how it's starting to get a little bit thicker. I will pile on the wraps just a little bit, getting closer and closer and on top of each other to the point where I'm just a little bit forward of halfway up the hook shank. About 60% up the hook shank. And you can bulk that up a little bit more if you want. I find thinner is usually a little bit better. The other thing is if this is too thick right here, then your rib is going to disappear inside the abdomen. I'll start palmering that up, and the reason why I had that anchored on the underside or a little bit on this side is so that as I am putting that first wrap in, I can easily just get that on top of the dubbing as opposed to having it tight down on the tail like that. I prefer to have that first wrap coming around right on top of the dubbing or the abdomen. And I'm going to get 3 to 4 wraps of rib on this body. If you get 5, if they're a little bit tighter, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I have one that comes right up at the very end, and that I can anchor in like that. And that is the rib. Cut that off and lash that down so that it tidies it up just a little bit. Now I'm ready for my wing case. The wing case can be made out of a number of different things. Traditionally, it's made out of turkey tail. You can, if you don't have turkey, use a pheasant tail fibers, as well as if you want the hare's mask right here. If you don't want to mess with the guard hairs, some people will tie in pheasant tail tips, pheasant tail fiber, the tips as a tail, 3 or 4 of those as a tail. I'm going to go ahead and cut a slip out of this turkey tail right here. I like to cut these kind of wide like this. I only need maybe about 5 or 6 of the barbs right here off the tail, but I cut them wide because then I have enough for a number of flies at the same time. So I'll push my bodkin in here, separate those out, and now I have a slip for my wing case. You notice I have a dark side and a light side to this. They sometimes call that the shiny side or the dull side. I want to tie this in so the dull side is up. That way when we fold this over and flip it over like this, I have the more pronounced shiny side, dark side up on top. So I'm going to set this onto the hook shank, hold that in with my left hand, and I'm just going to tie those in and run my thread right back up to the abdomen right there. The thorax area that we're going to tie in, I like to take some of the very, very short hairs from around the nose or the ear for the hair for the thorax. And the reason is I'm looking for almost more guard hairs in the thorax than I am underfur. I want to have those guard hairs sticking out so they'll end up kind of looking like legs. And this is where I mentioned before, when you take out that hair for the tail and you strip that underfur out, you want to set that aside because we're going to mix that together with some of the short hairs here, or even, as I said, some of the hair off the ears here for our dubbing for our thorax. So you get those mixed up. If there's not enough guard hairs in this, you can go ahead and cut some more out. Just trim out some of those guard hairs that are real short. They don't have a lot of underfur in them, and what you're looking for is just more the spiky guard hairs like this, and then you can mix those together in your dubbing so that you have a much spikier, leggier, if that's a word, dubbing. This also, understand we have a good bit tied in here in terms of the body and then the wing case, the turkey right here. So this is built up a little bit already. I don't have to make this real big and bushy. So I'm going to make another dubbing noodle. I'm not going to worry about it being on the thread quite as tight as I made the abdomen, but this is going to be another short dubbing noodle, maybe about 1 inch to 1.5 inches. You can always add a little bit more, so if you're not certain. And if it is kind of smooth like this right here, when you're wrapping this in, we can always pick out some of those legs. I'm going to start wrapping right at the end of the abdomen to blend the body all together, and then wrap forward. Again, if it's not quite enough, we can add just a little bit more. I don't want to dub exactly up to behind the eye of the hook. I want to give myself just a little bit of room because I have to tie in our wing case. At this point, I'll fold over the wing case, making certain that it is right along the back. I don't want it off to the side. I want it to be right straight across the back. And I will tie that in with a few wraps right behind the eye of the hook. So I get that anchored in, I'll trim off the excess, set this aside, because as you can see I have plenty for more wing cases for more flies. You can trim off some of these hairs that are sticking out over the ears, or excuse me, the ears, the eye of the hook. I don't think it really matters. A lot of, if you look at other videos or articles that people have had tying this fly, some of them like these really bushy all over, so I don't think it really matters. I'll go ahead and secure the ends of the cut material and put in a 4 or 5 turn whip finish to secure my thread. Cut the thread off. At this point I want to pick out some of the hairs under the thorax so that it looks like I've got some legs there. Now you also notice that, as I mentioned, I use some of the lighter hair for the abdomen and the darker hair for the thorax because I want this contrast in here. You can, and some people do, tie this all with the same dubbing so it's just all one color all the way through, but I prefer to tie it this way. I think that it fishes better because of the contrast in it. I'm just taking a small dubbing brush here. This is just a piece of wood with the hook side of some Velcro attached to it, and I'm just rubbing this up underneath the underside. If that's not working for you, or if it's getting too much of the fly, you can always take your bodkin and just pick out some of the fibers right here. You don't need a lot. We're not looking for a lot of bushy legs. We're just looking for the suggestion of some legs. And again, you don't have to trim up some of these that are sticking out, maybe in odd angles. I think it's going to fish just as well. So we'll go ahead and put some head cement on the eye of the hook here. Excuse me, the head of the fly, right behind the eye of the hook. And the fly is done. You can, some people like to put a drop of epoxy or Sally Hansen's, build up a little bit of a gloss head over the wing case. I don't, simply because the original fly did not have that in it. I have fished this many times and it fishes just fine this way, and it's an added step. Even if you use some UV material, it's another minute or so, and as far as I'm concerned, that's 2 or 3 more flies down the road, so I just assume go ahead and tie up more flies. But that's me. You're more than welcome to do it however you see. So that's the gold-ribbed hare's ear. A wonderful, wonderful fly that is a standard in trout circles. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this video and not only learned a new pattern, but maybe learned some new techniques and a few new skills. If you like this video, please hit that thumbs up button below. You can support Dressed Irons by hitting the subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you get notified when new videos are published. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Until next time, remember, it's fly time. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.